Well, what do we need to have in order to be prepared to launch into that cross-examination? We want everything we can get our grubby little paws on. And I think that includes any and all reports and field notes of the instant search, any videos or audio recordings of the search, the names and addresses of any neutral witnesses or bystanders who saw the exposure of the dog to the vehicle, any records of the dog and its handler's certifications or recertifications, the training manuals of the companies that certified or recertified the dog, the school records of the dog and the handler, the policy and procedural manual of the law enforcement agency using this canine interdiction team, the veterinary records of the dog, the postgraduate training records of the dog, and any and all records of the job performance of the dog in the field, called usually either canine narcotic search forms or detective dog utilization forms. All right, so once we get some of these things, how do we use them? How do we weave them into our cross-examination? Let's start with some simple things. The handler is going to testify that the dog alerted. What's an alert? When you hear these officers testify, you hear them use a lot of lingo. Alert, indication, expressed an interest in, was working an odor, was casting. Which one of those things is meaningful? Let's cross-examine the officer, the handler, preliminarily to establish that it is only when the dog goes to its final response that its otherwise ambiguous animal behavior is meaningful. And let's establish by cross-examination and examining the records what that final response is. Is this an aggressive response dog, an aggressive final response dog that indicates the presence of narcotics by aggressively approaching the target item and scratching it, barking and pawing? Or is it a passive final response dog which indicates the presence of the target odor by docilely trotting up to the suitcase in question, sitting down before it, looking over its shoulder at its handler and panting? What we need to establish during that cross-examination is that it is sheer speculation to say that the dog has detected anything until the dog goes to its final response. I mean, the dog can't talk, the dog can't write, the dog exhibits all kinds of ambiguous behavior when it's looking for salami in a picnic basket or when it's working its target odor. You'll find dishonest dog handlers who'll try to tell you that any behavior on the part of the dog somehow means that drugs, more likely than not, are present. We need to cross-examine to establish that it's only when the dog goes to the final response that it is meaningful. We also want to learn the lingo of the dog handler in our particular jurisdiction. For instance, if you go to Nebraska, if you look at the case of United States versus Hare that's cited in the handout, in Nebraska, an alert by the dog is not, in Nebraska trooper language, a final response. It is only indication that is a final response. So we want to cross-examine to pin down what is the meaningful action of the dog that the dog has been trained on to use to indicate the presence of the target odor. If we do that, then we can't be bamboozled and hornswoggled by dishonest dog handlers who will try to tell us that two completely contradictory responses by the dog both reliably indicate the presence of narcotics. Here's a case that we had in Wichita in which the dog handler, Agnew, testified that the dog alerted on the suitcase twice. The dog handler testified that the first alert was Rocco's old alert. Rocco putting his nose to the bag, sniffing heavily, looking over his shoulder at the handler. Then Rocco was exposed to the luggage a second time. Now Rocco has responded with his new alert, which was scratching at the bag with the front paws, and the handler says both of those reliably indicate the presence of narcotics. Even the DEA agrees that's wrong. A handler should never be in a position of trying to explain on the witness stand how his K-9 has an old and new alert, and how the two totally unrelated actions could each tell the handler that the drugs or drug residue is present. The dog should be trained to alert in one manner, and that manner should remain consistent throughout the dog's career. Well, the handler is going to say that the dog alerted, or indicated, or whatever the language is in that jurisdiction for the final response. Well, let's find out if the dog really did go to final response, and that's a lot easier for us these days when more and more traffic stops are being recorded and their aftermath recorded. Let's look at the video and see if what we've learned is the final response of the dog is really on the video, because it looks really bad for the doggy and the handler when it's an aggressive response dog. But when we look at the video, all we really find on the video is the dog trotting over next to the rear tire, cocking its leg, and afterwards a pool of liquid appearing. Or we see the handler leading the dog by the trunk, but at the same time jerking the leash and jerking the dog's neck towards the trunk where the handler suspects the drugs are.